When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I expected the usual nervous laugh. Instead, my mother stood. "I object," she said clearly, and before anyone could recover, she added, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." The room went silent in that sharp, unnatural way silence falls when humiliation is about to go viral. I could see 3 phones lift at once. My aunt covered her mouth. My husband's hand tightened around mine, steady but shocked. I felt the heat rise to my face, the sting of it, the way a lifetime of history can collapse into one public moment. But I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. Because weddings are supposed to be about vows, not vetoes. 3 days later, I watched that same woman raise her hand in a courtroom and swear to tell the truth. This is what happens when a parent confuses concern with control and believes your milestone is still their stage. If you've ever had someone try to reclaim your big day as their platform, leave a comment below. I read them, because the objection wasn't spontaneous. It had fingerprints on it. I work as a compliance manager for a regional healthcare network. My job is to notice patterns before they become lawsuits, to read the fine print before it turns into a headline, and to make sure processes protect people from predictable harm. I am not dramatic by nature. I am procedural. I document things. I preserve emails. I calendar conversations. I do not escalate unless I have proof. That same instinct followed me home. I have always been the responsible daughter. The one who booked flights, compared venue contracts, tracked deposits, negotiated vendor terms, and made sure everyone knew where to stand and when. When my fiancé and I started planning our wedding, I built spreadsheets. I reviewed cancellation clauses. I created timelines. I paid vendors directly so no one could help by rerouting money through themselves. My mother, on the other hand, prefers speeches. She loves a family-first moment. She stands up at birthdays and tells stories about sacrifice. She uses phrases like, "We raised you better than this," and "family takes care of family," in tones that sound generous but land like leverage. Publicly, she performs devotion. Privately, she pushes for control. Extra guests, different flowers, a larger hall, a cousin's band for exposure. The contrast was always there. I planned quietly and paid deposits on time. She made announcements about unity and sacrifice in rooms full of witnesses. And whenever she crossed a boundary, she framed it the same way. "She's just worried," relatives would say. Worried. As if every public scene she caused over the years had been maternal instinct instead of momentum. The objection didn't start at the altar. It started months earlier, disguised as help. The first sign was small. I had already booked our florist, paid the deposit, and signed the contract. 2 weeks later, my mother called to tell me she had found someone better, a distant cousin who did arrangements for family rates. She said she had already spoken to him and that he was excited to be part of something meaningful. I felt irritation rise, but I didn't snap. I calmly told her the florist was confirmed and non-refundable. She sighed heavily and said, "I just thought family should benefit from family." There it was, the first turn. Then came the guest list. We had agreed on a modest wedding, budgeted, counted seats carefully. One afternoon, I opened our RSVP spreadsheet and found 12 additional names added in a different handwriting. My mother had invited extended relatives without asking, assuring them it was already handled. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, "It's embarrassing not to include them. You don't want people talking." I paid for the extra seats. She took credit for inclusivity. The third example was louder. At a bridal shower my aunt hosted, my mother stood up with a microphone and joked about whether my fiancé could actually afford this wedding or whether I was fronting the bill because he's still building himself. The room laughed uncomfortably. My fiancé smiled politely. I felt the sting but kept my tone steady when I replied, "We're both paying." Concern becomes control when it needs an audience. That was the pattern. I funded and structured. She performed and redirected. By the time the rehearsal dinner arrived, I could feel something tightening. She raised a glass and said, "I just hope this union is as strong as the family standing behind it." It sounded harmless. It wasn't, because when she said standing behind it, she was looking at the room, not at me. And I realized then she hadn't been testing vendors or guest lists. She had been testing the stage. When the officiant reached the traditional line, If anyone objects, it was meant to be ceremonial. My mother treated it like an invitation. I object, she said clearly, stepping forward as if she had rehearsed the angle. Then she added, loud enough for the back rows, family takes care of family. I won't stand by while my daughter makes a mistake she can't undo. The words hung there like smoke. Guests shifted. Someone dropped a program. I saw venue staff glance at each other, unsure whether to intervene or wait. My fiancé's grip tightened around my fingers. Not panicked, just steady. I felt the humiliation rise, the instinct to argue, to defend, to explain. But I didn't. I looked at her and said calmly, we're proceeding. The contrast was sharp and irreversible. A day meant for vows had become a stage for veto. The ceremony continued, but not without cost. The whispering followed us down the aisle. My mother remained seated, arms folded, chin lifted, as if she had performed a necessary service. We finished the vows. We signed the certificate. And before the reception even began, I knew something else was coming. Because that objection hadn't been spontaneous. It had been prepared, and I was going to review every contract, every deposit trail, and every message that led us to that moment. After the ceremony, while the caterers were rearranging timelines and guests were pretending everything was fine, our coordinator pulled me aside near the service hallway. She didn't do that by accident, she said quietly. If she needed peace, she wouldn't need a microphone. I nodded. I felt the anger, the embarrassment, the old childhood instinct to fix it for her so the room could relax again. But I made one decision right there. Don't argue in public. Document everything. My mother thrives on reaction. I thrive on records. While she floated from table to table framing her objection as a mother protecting her child, I slipped into the bridal suite, opened my email, and searched her name. That's when I saw the vendor thread. A florist message forwarded from an account I didn't recognize. CC to my mother, discussing a possible cancellation and a family-requested pause. It wasn't addressed to me, and I was never meant to see it. The day after the wedding, my mother began calling it that ceremony. Not my wedding, not our vows. That ceremony. She told relatives it hadn't been legitimate because she objected. She hinted that the officiant should have stopped everything. She said she was looking into options, as if marriage were a contract she could contest simply because she disapproved. By Tuesday, the venue manager emailed me asking whether I had authorized a refund inquiry. I hadn't. Attached to the message was a forwarded voicemail transcript. My mother had called claiming she was the financial guarantor for the event and that she was reconsidering payment responsibilities due to new information about the groom's finances. I read it twice, then 3 times. The phrasing wasn't accidental. It suggested instability, risk, misrepresentation. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was positioning. Relatives began sending me screenshots. My mother had told one cousin that my husband was in debt up to his ears. She told another that she feared he was using me for status. She said she had been forced to object because she couldn't let me walk blindly into something dangerous. Each message felt like a needle. I felt the rage of it, sharp and immediate. But I didn't reply emotionally. I drafted responses the way I draft compliance memos, short, time-stamped, factual. To the venue. Please note that all deposits were paid from my account ending in 4832. No third party has authorization to request cancellation or refund. To the florist, confirming that no cancellation request has been made by the contracting party. Any outside communication should be redirected to me. To my extended family. For clarity, no debts exist beyond the standard mortgage and student loan disclosures already reviewed prior to marriage. Every response was dated, saved, backed up. The more she spoke, the more organized I became, and the pattern grew clearer. She wasn't just embarrassed by the wedding. She was constructing a story, one in which she had bravely intervened to protect her daughter from financial ruin. If the marriage faltered later, she would be the woman who tried to warn everyone. That's when I realized this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about narrative control. On Thursday afternoon, I received another forwarded email. This one from the venue's accounting department, mistakenly sent to my mother first. It referenced a chargeback request under review. Chargeback. My heart slowed instead of raced. I logged into my bank portal and checked the transaction history. There it was, a pending dispute filed against the reception deposit, filed by someone claiming financial authority. My mother had not just spoken. She had attempted to undo the wedding on paper. And that was the moment I stopped thinking about embarrassment and started thinking about evidence. The chargeback wasn't the only thing I found. When I called the bank to confirm the dispute details, they forwarded me the submission notes attached to it. The request had been filed using a scanned copy of the original venue contract, my contract, with a handwritten annotation added in the margin. Bride emotionally coerced. Event legitimacy in question. My mother's handwriting. I felt the sting of it, but I did what I've always done when something doesn't add up. I widened the lens. I went back through my email server, searched vendor domains, and checked forwarding logs. That's when I found the message thread I had not been copied on. My mother emailing the florist, the venue, and even the caterer, suggesting there might be legal grounds to pause services due to concerns about the groom's financial disclosures. She had coordinated it. The objection wasn't a spontaneous emotional outburst. It had been positioned, supported, and reinforced in writing days before the wedding. The contrast could not have been clearer. Publicly, she was the worried mother protecting her daughter. Privately, she was building a cancellation trail. I compiled the screenshots, exported the chargeback documentation, and saved the voicemail one cousin sent me. My mother urging guests to bear witness in case the ceremony needed to be contested. Then I called an attorney. He listened carefully, asked for the documentation, and said one sentence that shifted the air in the room. "This isn't concern," he said. "This is interference. An interference that causes financial harm can be addressed." For the first time since the objection, I felt something other than humiliation. I felt leverage. 2 nights later, my mother asked to talk like adults. She came over without apology and without acknowledgement of the chargeback. She sat at my dining table, the same one I had paid for, and folded her hands like she was leading a prayer. Then she said it. "If you loved me, you'd annul this. Not if you're unhappy. Not if you need time. If you loved me." There it was. Love turned into leverage. She said the family was embarrassed. She said the wedding could still be undone quietly if I moved quickly. Then she added the second line, softer but sharper. "Sign the venue refund to me and we'll fix this before it gets ugly." Fix this. As if the marriage were the problem and not her sabotage. I listened. I felt the heat rise in my chest, the instinct to defend my husband, my choice, my vows. But I didn't argue, because the contrast was now undeniable. She wasn't asking for reconciliation. She was demanding obedience. And for the first time, I understood that the only peace she would accept was the kind that erased me. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue about love. I called my attorney the next morning and authorized him to proceed. We filed a formal complaint for tortious interference and defamation. We preserved every contract, every timestamp, every forwarded email, and every bank record tied to the chargeback. A cease and desist letter went out by certified mail, instructing my mother to immediately stop contacting vendors, retract false financial claims, and cease representing herself as a financial guarantor. When she called, furious, I kept my voice level. "We proceeded," I said. "You interfered. Here are the records." Silence on the other end. That was the first crack. If you've ever had to stay calm while someone tried to rewrite your story in real time, you know how unnatural that restraint feels. But facts age better than fury. The venue confirmed receipt of the legal notice. The bank flagged the chargeback as disputed fraud. Vendors replied in writing, acknowledging the unauthorized contact. 3 days later, a hearing date was set to review the financial damages tied to the interference claim. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches. Just paper, dates, and a courtroom calendar with her name printed beside mine. And for the first time since she stood up at my wedding, the stage belonged to procedure, not performance. That my mother took the witness stand with the same posture she used at birthdays and church banquets. Upright, composed, convinced that sincerity would carry her through. Under oath, she repeated her script. She had objected out of love. She had contacted vendors to pause harm. She believed the groom had misrepresented his finances. She insisted she was protecting her daughter from ruin. Then my attorney began introducing the documents. First, the email thread showing she contacted vendors before the ceremony, referencing legal concerns she had never raised with me. Then the chargeback submission with her handwritten annotation. Then the voicemail urging guests to witness what happens today, in case the marriage needed to be contested. The judge leaned forward. "So you believe the event was invalid," he said evenly, "yet you attended and coordinated communications beforehand?" My mother blinked. "That wasn't my intention." The judge flipped a page. "In this note, bride emotionally coerced, you wrote that?" Silence. "Yes, but..." "And what evidence did you have of coercion?" Another silence. The contrast sharpened in that moment. In the wedding hall, she wore the badge of parenthood and expected deference. In a courtroom, she wore an oath, and paper does not bow to performance. Her answers began to wobble. Dates blurred. Claims softened. She contradicted herself on whether she had authority over the contract. She insisted she was misunderstood, then admitted she had hoped to force a conversation. The judge did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. By the time questioning ended, the woman who had commanded a room with one word, "I object," was gripping the edge of the witness stand like it might steady her. And for the first time in my life, I saw my mother without an audience to save her. The court ordered restitution for the venue losses and formally directed my mother to cease any further interference with vendors or third parties. The chargeback was reversed. The cease and desist became enforceable. There was no dramatic gavel moment, just paperwork that quietly closed doors she had tried to force open. Family fallout followed in stages. A few relatives called to say they hadn't known the full story. Some apologized for believing the concerned narrative without asking for proof. Others went silent. Silence, I've learned, is sometimes just embarrassment with no script left to read from. The contrast settled slowly. Her chaos had been loud, emotional, and public. My response had been structured, dated, and documented. My husband and I didn't throw another party. We didn't post statements. We simply moved forward. We changed nothing about our marriage and everything about our boundaries. The wedding album sits on our shelf now without commentary. And for the first time, the memory of that day belongs to us. Quietly and without interruption. Love doesn't object to your happiness. It protects it. If you've ever had to choose dignity over family approval, you know how quiet that decision can be and how powerful it becomes later. Leave a comment below if you've faced that choice. And subscribe for more calm, proof-backed justice stories where composure, not chaos, changes everything.